Oh man, all right. We've been talking about Joe already, or almost flooding the baptistry of the church over the weekend, and we've been catching up for a few minutes. But Joe, good to see you. Good to be online with you here, and glad to talk with you.
And good to be online too, man. Yeah, it was pretty interesting. Almost flooding our church, flooding the baptistry, overflowing and flooding the other day. So I'm glad our cameras weren't live in the sanctuary, because our folks would have seen a side of Pastor Joe that they've never seen before.
Oh, that's funny. Well, we had the opposite problem. There was a couple of times back in the day we forgot to fill it up until like the last little bit, like Sunday morning. Said, "Oh my goodness, who filled the baptistry?" And nobody had filled it. So we're like, well, I don't know if it's got time to warm up between now and then, so they might get a little cold in there today. But
well, that was the other side. We had some plumbing work done on our baptistry to kind of correct a couple things and fix a couple things. I don't have any idea what they did, but what I do know is that it wasn't circulating the water through the hot water heater to warm things up.
Oh.
So I took off Saturday afternoon and run down and go get a trough warmer for cattle troughs out in the pastures when they freeze up.
Yeah.
I went and got that. I stuck a concrete block down in the baptistry. I set the heater on top of that. I was afraid that it would get too hot and start melting the baptistry. And set that all up and get that going. Then I'm afraid to touch the water because I've got an electric diode.
Yeah. Oh,
it was crazy, but it got warm enough not to shock people. So it wasn't great, but it got warm enough not to shock anybody and not to hurt anybody. So yeah.
Well, good stuff. Hey, let's talk about evangelism today. That was a topic we had decided to discuss, and specifically a couple areas. One, what is the church's role in discipling people? Did I say evangelism? I mean discipleship. We were talking about discipleship, right? My mind's all over the place. I'm sorry. We're talking about discipleship, and evangelism is part of discipleship, but what's the church's role in discipleship, and how is it that individual Christians all have a responsibility to take part in discipling others? It's not just the church's job, it's the individual's job. So we're just going to see where this conversation takes us and go from there.
Yeah.
Sounds like
a plan, buddy. One of the first things I think we need to distinguish, and I think that the church has struggled with, or maybe even, I don't want to call it copped out, but we have labeled discipleship as Sunday school classes. Sunday school classes are great, but Sunday school class is not what discipleship is all about. Discipleship is about really intentional personal relationships. In Bikers for Christ, we talk about we earn the right to be heard. How do you earn the right to be heard?
Yeah.
You earn the right to be heard by being intentional in people's lives and spending time with them. Maybe not even talking about the gospel at that point. You're just getting to know each other, and you're developing a trust. You're developing a relationship and a friendship. Then those opportunities come to start getting to know each other. I think that's what Jesus did with the disciples. He spent intentional time with them. They walked the roads together. That's discipleship. Sunday school class can be a part of that, but I think it has to go deeper than that.
Yeah, absolutely. And I like what you said. We've kind of confused it, and it's almost like we've taken a cop out and said, well, hey, we had a class, we had Wednesday nights, or we had Sunday nights, or we had this or that. People don't want to be discipled. It's not my fault. We did, we as the leaders in the church, we provided opportunities. But that's not how Jesus did discipleship, right? But at the same time, the world was so different when he did it. I mean, they walked around everywhere they went. Now we say, well, I'll meet you at a restaurant for a meal instead of inviting people into our home for hospitality like they had in biblical times and in an Eastern culture. So it's almost like we can't do discipleship identical to how Jesus or any of the apostles did discipleship. But how do we do that today has to be reinterpreted to our times and our cultural setting,
That's
right?
exactly right. And, you take opportunities for this, and I know I take opportunities for this. Here's one of the areas I'm doing it with. I've got some folks that have absolutely been hurt by the church that, quite frankly, really refuse to come to church anymore. Part of it
Oh, yeah.
was family dynamics. Part of it was just feeling like they didn't measure up and they didn't fit the church crowd, and people made them feel that way. And so I've got a couple of folks that I literally call them up, and on Saturday mornings we meet early for breakfast, or during the week we'll meet early and have a cup of coffee or have a sandwich, and we just sit and talk, and allow them that time to be able to heal, allow them that time to be able to develop a friendship and develop and realize that, wow, this pastor isn't going to judge me for my past, and he's not going to condemn me for the way I'm living. He's accepting me right where I'm at. Jesus did that with the disciples. He didn't tell the disciples, clean up and then come talk to me. Maybe I'll let you travel with me. Wait a minute, we need to do a job survey, and we need you to fill out a job application. And if your qualifications meet, then we'll talk. No, come follow me and I'll make you fishers of men.
And I've spent about a year and a half trying some in-depth study of what Jesus, what his method of discipleship looked like, how he did that. And I mean, it's more than just, hey, walk with me. I mean, that was the biggest component of it, but he did several specific things. When you read the Gospels with the lens of investigating what discipleship was, you start to see, really, it was more than just walk and follow me. I mean, he did intentional teaching, intentional healing, intentional acts of service, both to them and sending them to serve others. He did several things that was like his comprehensive method of discipling them, with the intention of not, there's this confusion, I think, that I get sometimes, where I say, okay, you've got to look just like me, how I serve Christ. That's the only way I know how to teach somebody to be like Christ, is to do it the way I do it. And that's not necessarily true, because how you're going to be like Christ is different than how I'm going to be like Christ. But the end goal is still that we love God and we love others. Right. I mean, that's what it's going to amount to in the long run. And so how do we, how do we do that in this culture? Like I say, we kind of drive everywhere. So your interesting thing, like we meet at a restaurant and have this conversation, and you say we just talk. But when you, Joe, live as close as you can to being Christ-like, that conversation is naturally going to flow to that, both out of you and their interest in seeing what they see in you. They're going to say, well, how can Christ help me in this area of my life? Or how can I serve him when this and this is going on? So I think the conversation is just, it might just be like you say, oh, we just talk. Like, I don't have bullet points and an agenda, but at the same time, it's going to gravitate towards that. Maybe not today and maybe not next month, but eventually you're going to get there.
Right. And it really comes down to the fact at times that we need to just listen. As pastors, we find ourselves trying to figure out, okay, what do I need to say? What do I need to do to help this person walk through this trial that they're going through? Sometimes I just need to let them talk. Same thing with my wife, with your wife. My wife comes to me with a problem and she needs to start venting something. She is not looking for me to start giving her the answers. Well, go do this and this and this and this and this. My wife has turned to me a number of times and said, honey, I'm not looking for you to fix me or fix this situation. I'm looking for you to listen. And I think that's one of the areas that we struggle as pastors. We struggle. We need to allow the Holy Spirit to be able to do the work, and we need to allow folks to be able to process and walk through these things themselves. Can we pose questions that will help them think about that? Yes, we can. But we do need to allow them the room to be able to walk that process out themselves. No one could force Nick to come to relationship with Jesus. No one could force me to come to
Yeah.
relationship with Jesus. We had to come to that point in our life where we said, I'm sick and tired of being sick and tired, and I want some change in my life. Are we willing to walk with folks, regardless of how long it takes, to allow them the opportunity to come to understand and know Jesus the way we know him? Therein lies one of the big challenges. We set an agenda. I want to be able to win 10 people and lead 10 people to relationship with Jesus this year. And I want to effectively be able to do discipleship with at least 3 of them this year. There's nothing wrong with setting those goals, but is that my agenda or is that God's agenda? Kingdom of God or kingdom of man?
There's a book that I read where they talked about if somebody goes and wins one new person to Jesus, one convert every day for a year, they'll have 365 new converts. But they're not discipling them. They're just saying, hey, here's the Romans road or something, pray the prayer, you're in, and then going on to the next person. In theory, okay, that's 365 people that allegedly now have a relationship with Christ on some level. But they said if you disciple one person for a year, and then the next year you disciple another person and they disciple the first one you made disciples one, and it's almost like that marketing, pyramid scheme, but without it being disingenuous like that. But if each disciple after a year then picks somebody else and disciples them for a year to the point where they're ready to make another disciple, it was something like 8 years or 7 point something years. That pyramid, so to speak, has more people in it than the person that was by themselves, just one a day. And not only that, but Jesus never said, hey, go and make sure they pray this prayer and do this formula and they're in. He said, make disciples. Right. I mean, that's really what it comes down to, right? It's a matter of obedience.
Right. And
Jesus said, if you love me, you'll obey my commands. Go make disciples.
That's exactly right. One of the models that we saw and that churches used for a while down in Central America, there was a church down there. It's one of the largest churches in the world that their whole focus is intentional discipleship. Take one person and walk with them and teach that person how to take another person and walk with them. So I know that in Bikers for Christ, one of the things that we've done for years is we would ask 3 questions. And I did this series with our folks here in the church, and I asked them 3 questions. Who's discipling you? Who are you discipling? And who are they discipling? So there has to be someone who is intentionally discipling me and walking with me and walking that journey out with me. Then my responsibility is to do that with another person. And then my responsibility is to help that other person in their discipleship of somebody else. And that multiplies big. It is an area that's hard for us to grab hold of in the church. And we want quick results sometimes in the church. And they're just not going to happen that way. Man, I've got guys that I've been ministering to for 20 years from the motorcycle clubs, that there is still no real transformational difference in their life, but they are asking questions and they are open to having those conversations. They are responding, and they will call whenever there's issues that pop up and those crisis moments hit in their lives. We already have that opportunity. Hey, I'm calling you. I want you to pray with me. Will you pray about this? Yeah, we will. And we'll do it right now. So that's not to say that I have figured anything out. That's just saying that through years of walking through this, that's areas that have been working in our life. Is it a mass amount of numbers? No, it's not. But are there relationships today with Jesus that have a grounding that are moving forward? And not only that, they're bringing someone else along with them. Yeah, there is.
I think that's one of the hard things to do. Was, you mentioned, the 3, discipleship relationships, and the easiest thing to forget in the middle of that is that person that you're discipling, like kind of that third relationship you talked about, are you also prepping them to do that later? I think about Moses. He spent so much time with Joshua. I mean, Moses is there at the tent of meeting. The God comes down in the pillar of cloud. He sits there. The scriptures say he would talk to Moses face to face as a man would talk with his friend. And they're sitting there, and I don't know exactly what God looked like. Only apparently Moses did in that case. But whatever form God took on for that moment. And so there's God, talking with Moses, and Joshua's hanging out there. And then Moses would leave, and it said Joshua would remain at the tent. But then after Moses is gone and Joshua's the leader, there's never any mention of who he trained up and who he taught and who he showed to be the next. And so the next thing we see when you read like the book of Judges is, there was no leader in Israel. Every man did as he saw fit. And I think that was a failure in seeing what he was supposed to do. Was, part of Joshua's job wasn't just to govern the people and to move into the promised land, but it was also to say, hey, you know what, who's going to be standing in my place when I'm gone? And apparently it was no one. And how often do we do that in whatever, whether it's a post of serving in the church or the community somewhere, or whether it's just as a Christian, are we raising up people as disciples of Christ, that will continue that, and it'll not just be a disciple that we made, but that they'll go and make the next generation of disciples. And that's something we've got to constantly remember, or we'll turn out like Israel. There's no leadership. And look where the church is headed now. And not that everybody that becomes a disciple ends up being a pastor, but look at I don't know, have the stats in front of me. I'm not good about memorizing them, but look how many stats you hear about where there's going to be a shortage of pastors. This isn't just the Nazarene church, although we're one of them, but just about every church is going to be, there's a shortage of young pastors coming up. And that's on us. I mean, it really is. We've got to be about that work. Now, God will call them, but he partners with us to do that work of making the next generation of disciples. And we've got to figure this out.
That's exactly right. I can tell you, being right here close to the campus of Trevecca Nazarene University, man, there are some incredibly gifted and incredibly called young people that are coming up through the ranks right now. I've got an intern working with me that's been here for 2 years now. And man, this young man can preach. I mean, he can preach, and he is putting himself into stepping out of his comfort zone. So he actually interned with me last summer, and he interned with Welcome Home Ministries, a recovery house that's right across the street. Seth actually went in and lived there in relationship with the guys and lived there all summer, spending time with those guys, just having talks out on the rock wall and eating meals with them. That's an invaluable source for him, and that is going to make Seth an incredible pastor to a church one of these days. He can preach and he can pastor. I've known some really good preachers in my life that could just absolutely bring the fire, but they were horrible pastors. And then I've known some incredible pastors that weren't great preachers, but they had that relationship. And there's a difference. There's only been a couple that I could really say were absolutely incredible pastors and preachers, and they could really walk both of those roles. I think you're going to be more of a pastor preacher. You do better than I do. But pastoring and having relationships with folks, that's easy for me to do. Preaching, well, that's another that I feel like at times, and part of that could just be from my past, but I feel like I fall short at times.
Well, but you're like the guy that I look to probably above almost anyone else as far as, really when the rubber meets the road in having those intentional relationships to make disciples. And you know what? Sunday morning preaching happens for, 25 to 45 minutes a week, or a little more or less, depending on where you come from, but about a half hour a week you're preaching. And I remember going through classes too. This is a little side trail. They would, I'd have all these pastors that were teaching us, and they'd be like, "Oh yeah, it takes about 20 hours a week in sermon prep time." And I'm thinking, well, it doesn't take me that long because I read fast, I retain well, I process quickly. Like, it just doesn't take me that long. But also, why would I spend 20 hours out of my week to prepare for a 30-minute portion of a service when I've got, 168 hours in a week or something like that? I got to sleep and eat some of that time and be with my family, but a large portion of that time is going to be with people. And why would I say I don't have time for you because I'm working on this sermon?
Right.
Or why would I stay up so late working on it 20 plus hours a week and not have any energy because I didn't sleep enough, where I'm not present with people when I'm with them? We've each got to find that balance. And if there's preachers out there that spend, if you're a teaching pastor at a church, you probably better spend 20 to 30 hours a week in studies. Now, that doesn't mean sitting there writing notes just for that sermon, but, and I certainly spend a lot of time studying and reading or listening to audiobooks and podcasts and things that I guess you could say I do spend that 20 hours a week. But it's not all directed just for that sermon, because I've got to spend some time with the people. My people that God's called me to be a shepherd. That's what a pastor is a shepherd.
And
if we're not spending that time
I
with
absolutely
people,
agree with you, Nick. And I think, as horrible as the COVID and as the pandemic and stuff has been, and boy, we could go all over the place with that, but as horrible as that has been, there have also been some strengths and some really good things that have come out of that. Number one, pastors who were used to just sitting in the building and kind of ministering to the people as they came through the doors have had to get creative and think about, how can we get outside these doors? Because the people aren't just going to come back. And a lot of folks haven't come back. They've gotten content to sit at home with their computers and tune into a service. And while they may have the service going and live streaming the service, how intentional are they really in staying involved in that service?
Yeah.
The fact of the matter is, they're not. 15 minutes, 20 minutes into it, if it's not just got them on the edge of their seat, they're cooking breakfast. They're going outside and playing the ball with the kids. They're going and walking the dog in the backyard, and they've missed out on the entire crux of the service. So online and streaming services is extremely important, and we need to do it well. When we preach, we need to be prepared, and we need to do it to our best. We need to do it with excellence. But
absolutely,
we can't be so consumed with trying to get all the words and all the stuff right that we're not spending time with people on a one-on-one basis and intentionally throughout the week. If we do, we're disconnected. My 2 cents.
Yeah. One of the things that I'm, I guess, bad at or deficient in, when you're talking about like online sermons and online presence and things like that, is I'm terrible about coming up with a catchy title for a sermon. When you're putting a video on YouTube or something like that, if you spend some time and create something that grabs people's attention, they'll stop and watch it. And, I started paying attention to the videos I clicked on. It had to do with the little cover photo they put on there that you see when you're scrolling YouTube and or Facebook or whatever. And then the name on that video, it matters. And I spend so little time working on that. And so it's like, man, I wonder if there's little things I could do rather than create just a video message that's for what I would call my church people who maybe can't be there, or just the ones you talked about that left at COVID and never came back in the doors. Really, my focus was creating video content for Sunday morning service replacement for them. And to be honest, I'm kind of tired of that. I understand there's a few folks that have legitimate reasons where maybe they can't be out and about. We've always had shut-ins and things like that, and we've probably always been deficient in ministering to them. But people that still use, well, I don't want to get out because of COVID, but they'll have all their neighbors over, or they'll go to the store all the time and other things, or down, here we've got like the Strawberry Festival, other, State Fair, things like that. And you see people going to those, or Busch Gardens or something, and you see it on Facebook and you're like, really, you're going to that, cesspool of people gathered together, but not to church. Okay. And so I'm kind of tired of making video content just for people to have an excuse to say, well, I still got my church. And yet the other thing is, can I use that platform to maybe reach people who just happen to be scrolling on their off time and don't go to church at all? And that's one of the reasons we do a podcast. That's one of the reasons that we do still put video content online as the church, because that might be a way we can have that contact with people. But it's still, back to our original statement, it still doesn't take the place of discipleship. You can never podcast enough or online sermon enough or any of that to where you're actually becoming a disciple of Christ. I think they're tools and they're useful. Otherwise, I don't want to waste any time. We wouldn't be here if I didn't think it would be useful to someone.
Yeah, and I agree with you. There are those that say if the church doesn't develop a really good online presence, then the church is going to miss out. I agree with that to a sense. But, as pastors, one of the things that we're called to do, and this is what Jesus did with his disciples. You remember where Jesus in Matthew 9 looked down on the town and he said, the harvest is plentiful, but the workers are few. Therefore, beseech the Lord of the harvest and go. Then in chapter 10, he went on to say, Matthew went on to say, and Jesus had his disciples, his students, and he was teaching them, and then he was empowering them to go. And then he says, then the name of the 12 apostles, those sent with authority, were, and he named them off. Freely you have received, freely give. One of the things that we as pastors have to remember, my point is, one of the things we as pastors have to remember is that we have to empower our folks to be involved in ministry, inside and outside the doors. You know me, everyone that knows me knows that I'm an absolute computer and technology idiot. I am. But Amy, who is our online pastor here at the church, is developing content, and she's working on ways to be able to make connections. They were talking yesterday about opportunities to be, hey, how can we do some video chat and video conferencing where we can actually look at and talk with each other? So there's great validity to that, but nothing, it doesn't matter how good we do it, nothing will replace being together with the body of Christ. Plain and simple. It won't.
Yeah. Yep. That's interesting that Amy's working on that stuff, because for those of you that might listen to this that are part of the Nazarene Church, you might have caught wind of this, but they changed the rules from the general board on down. So for all of us, they changed the rules during COVID for counting attendance. We have to do all these stats and figures and keep track of stuff. And so we were allowed to count a reasonable number, like, of people that you actually believe watched most of your online service for times where we either were, not in person, or for just those people that weren't in person. But a couple months back, they changed that, and they said, if you're going to count somebody's online attendance, and there's several criteria, but it was mainly things like they actually have to, be present online for whatever portion, the broader portion of the service content. And they have to engage with the church in some way, whether that's leaving comments or whether that's otherwise being contacted and interacted with by the church. And, there has to be some type of connection point. You can't just say, well, YouTube said we had 64 views. That's 64 extra people. But was it, or maybe you did have 64 legit views, but was there some way that they were part of the church, part of the body of Christ, or were they just another viewer? Because we're not into Nielsen ratings and all that stuff. We're not Netflix, we're not CBS, we're not whatever. We're the church. And if our central mission is to make disciples, what's the Nazarene Church say? To make Christ-like disciples in the nations. Just watching that service every week is not, you're never getting communion. You're never witnessing somebody being baptized unless you have a live stream and you're recording that and putting it out there. There's large parts of what we do as the church. You're not there to pray at the altar when somebody's sick or any of those things that the church does. You're not part of that. And so there's something missing when you pull yourself away from the body of Christ.
Right. And we've spent some time on that, and walking through that. I guess the question is, and let's just go back to it: how do we disciple in a changing culture and a changing time today? What type of things, Nick, are you coming up with? Is your leadership team coming up with that is giving you some new ideas in discipleship?
Yeah, that's a good one. You know, I tell you, we still struggle, and one of the things that I struggle with is, you talked about different types of pastors you have. I know one guy that's here on our district in Florida, Brad Fink, who's just an excellent leadership guru. I mean, he is, when you talk about having vision and how to get that to happen, he's fantastic at that. And that's one of the things that I've had to play catch up game on over the last couple of years. When I realized that I was quite deficient in that, I said, okay, I've got to figure out how this is. And so one of the things that I struggle with is I get a lot of ideas sometimes, and I'll start out strong, and then I fail to gather a team of people around me to continue that vision. And so that's one of the things that I'm working on. So I get a lot of ideas about what could we do as the church, that creates new disciples. And sometimes either for lack of participation or for lack of follow through, they don't happen. But one of the things that I just recently tried was, and all of this has to work within the context of where you live, because where you live is vastly different from where I live. I mean, I've got, the picture behind you at the Nashville skyline, you can, practically see that from your church. If your hill was a little taller, probably. Can you see any buildings from your church? I forget.
Not from right at this point, not from right here. Now, if I'm up on the roof, I can see the skyline for sure.
There you go. I was going to say, you wouldn't have to go far to see Nashville, part of the Nashville skyline from where you're at. I live in, a place that's about 45 or 50 minutes from Tampa, but if they would stop building so many new houses, we would have more cow pastures than anything around here, once you get a couple minutes outside of Zephyr Hills. And so what we do have a lot of is mobile home parks, and a lot of them are seasonal with snowbirds that come down. And so a lot of them are going back home, right about this time of year, and back up north somewhere to the northern states. But one of the things that I said is, let's start working within those parks and doing either, now again, we're back to, it's just a Bible study, but hopefully it's a point where we can draw others in. But let's start doing Bible studies and or services in those parks and get the residents that are believers, whether they attend our church or whether it's just a random one that we go to that agrees to let us in. Let's start doing basically evangelistic outreach there. And it's kind of like, I'll let it happen organically and be led by the Spirit of God. If we get a group of people, if we get someone that doesn't know Christ and is, making steps towards faith, let's work with them and disciple them. And more likely than not, it's going to be mobilizing the people that already live there that know Christ to get out and do that work of evangelism and discipleship with their neighbors, because it can't all be on me. I'll help get people started. I'll help get people going. But when it comes down to it, that's their neighbors, and it's not my responsibility. But the first person whose responsibility it is right there. So let's get them mobilized.
Well, that's exactly right. And that's the same thing that I tell our folks from the pulpit. Guys, it's not my job to pray with your neighbor. It's your job to pray with your neighbor. Yeah. It's not my job to pray with your coworker. It's your job to pray with your coworker. It's not my job to do the job of evangelism. My job, your job, is to equip, empower, and send. That's what we're supposed to do.
Yeah.
What tools do you need? What can I help you with? And what can I train you to do that will help you have the confidence to be able to go and share your faith? Got a young man that lives over at Trevecca Towers. And he said, well, I'm really being called, and I just got my local minister's license, and I'm being called to evangelism. And I'm like, really? Okay.
Now, wait a minute. Trevecca Towers is a retirement community. So who is this guy?
Yeah, for all of you tuning in.
Fine.
So I continued to talk to him, and I said, tell me about the evangelism. What are you doing, and what's leading into that? Well, I really want people to get into the Bible and study the Bible and actually carry a Bible with them. We don't carry Bibles anymore. So I'm buying Bibles and I'm giving Bibles out.
Okay.
And then my next question was, okay, is that evangelism or is that just another form of the Gideons International?
Yeah.
There has to be evangelism means that we're going to engage people and we're going to walk with them. And then discipleship is saying, I handed you a Bible. Now let's spend some time learning how to walk into this. You're scared of it. You don't understand it. I get that. It doesn't make any sense to you. I get that. Let's sit down and let's start asking some questions and let's walk through this together. That's the discipleship aspect of it. So we need to be able to do that. One of the tools that we've started doing, and I really felt like that the Lord in our vision casting for 2022 that God was leading us to, was to get intentional about discipleship. So we started using, I bought it for all of our staff, and as we sat down, man, Nick, you know as well as I do, there is a ton of discipleship material out there, but it is not used effectively. Plain and simple. It was the 1970s, 1980s, even the 1990s. A lot of these tools came out and they were being used, but we haven't been doing that. We've been trying to figure out how can we relate to, let's see, what is the millennials? Well, the millennials they're 3 generations down now. Now we've got Generation X and Generation Y and Z now. How do we relate to them and how do we make church relevant to them so they'll come and go? Well, quite frankly, if we would spend time getting intentional in people's lives, put our phones down, get off of social media, and actually go sit down and have some conversations with somebody and show them that we actually care about their lives, that will go further than any type of tool that we may throw out there and use. We're using Discipled by Jesus by Hal and Debbie Perkins. And it's 5 questions. So can we teach folks to say, okay, what passage of scripture are you in today? Okay, great. You were reading Psalms, the 51st Psalm. Then you go through and start asking these questions. Here's the first question. Who do you say that I am? Who is Jesus to you in that passage of scripture? Who do you identify him as in that passage of scripture? Next question is, do you understand what I've done for you? That comes out of the John 13 passage. Do you understand what Jesus has done and what he is doing for you? Based off of that scripture, who is Jesus? Who do you say that I am? Do you understand what I've done for you? The next question is, are you listening to me? Are you hearing what he's saying to you? How is Jesus challenging you to change in your life? What's he encouraging you to do? Fourth question is, do you love me? Are you sold out for Jesus, and are you walking in his, and are you willing to do whatever he calls you to do? Then the last question is do you believe me? Do you believe in his resurrection power? Do you believe that he still has the power to change our world today? Or is it up to us to create a better service and more online and more lights, more smoke, more loud music? Is it up to us to do that? What are we supposed to do? There was a rant.
No, that's good. The Wesley Brothers, John and Charles, they had their own sets of questions. I mean, it was 21 of them that they would ask each other, and they became what we know as the Methodist Church. They were called the Methodists because they had these methods for keeping each other in check and for leading a holy life. And, 5 questions is a lot easier. These 21 questions, I wish I had the list in front of me. I've got one in my desk drawer in my church office, and they hit pretty hard. When I read these questions, I'm like, ooh, man, I'd be like maybe a C+ at best. Some of the times if I had that pop quiz,
some of those questions go into, have you walked out and lived a holiness life this week? Or is your language, your attitude, your movings around, are the things that you're doing, are they a reflection of the work of Jesus Christ in your life? or are you operating and working on your own terms? So yeah, they had hard-hitting questions, definitely hard-hitting questions.
Yeah. And there's got to be a balance between, being so like centrally focused on that perfect version of holiness and actually being with people. And I think it'd be easy to say that the early Methodists, didn't get that, but that's not true if you actually know about John Wesley, because he was a man of the people. I mean, he rode on horseback, which, only horse people do that anymore these days. Or that one time I saw somebody riding their horse down the side of the road in Zephyr Hills when I first moved here. But we've seen everything, man, too. I mean, there's a lot of the little like jazzy scooters, the little electric wheelchairs. We see a ton of those going down the sidewalk. There's some of them that are little 3-wheel ones. I swear these things go about 25 miles an hour, and I don't know how they don't crash them because it'd be so tippy. They're riding those down the road here, man. It's nuts. I've seen go-karts, those little like $500 Coleman scooters that you get at Tractor Supply, those going down the road. I got one, I think he rides it. I hear him about every night around 8 or 9 o'clock going past my house. It's just bicycles with gasoline engine kits that they put on there, or steel or something. I'm not sure. And it's nuts, man. There's like as many odd forms of transportation in my town as there are cars. But anyway, John Wesley rode on horseback.
Cool, and we're seeing churches get creative. You're seeing the cowboy churches pop up where they're actually doing ministry on horseback, and they're doing ministry in barns. And one of the churches over in Memphis built a big barn with a riding arena in it, and they're doing church services there now. So they've got
that's Lynn Holmes,
Lynn
right?
Holmes,
Yeah, I just bumped into him about a month ago over in Orlando at Exponential Conference. Saw a group of folks from your neck of the woods, from from Tennessee Mid-South District, Tennessee and Mississippi, and got to talk with some of my old friends that I'd pal around with, and I was asking Lynn how it's going, and they said they're going to do a cowboy church. So
then you have biker ministries. I've been involved in biker ministries for 20 years, and there's hundreds and hundreds of biker ministries around the United States and around the world, so that are reaching out to those bikers and those that are on motorcycles. Man, what could it look like to have a moped, mopeders for Jesus, and beep, beep, hey!
Yeah.
What could it look like to do that? What could it look like to service the scooters and stuff that some of our elderly have to have in order to be able to move around? Hey, come over. Let's come over. We'll service, make sure things are working well on your bike. You guys have all kinds of sand down there, man. Sand gets in all kinds of things. So cleaning and servicing things. The church has gotten creative in doing outreach type stuff and doing evangelism. Where the church has lacked is being involved in that intentional discipleship building process. That's where we have to, if the church is going to survive, that's where we have to come back to. I believe that wholeheartedly. If not, turn the lights out, put a for sale sign up front, close the building. We're not going to develop a program big enough and dynamic enough for people to come in. If our folks aren't excited about coming to church, if our folks aren't excited about the transformations that are taking place in people's lives, they're not going to tell their neighbors. They're not going to tell their friends. They keep reaching out to the same group of folks or trying to pull people from other churches. I don't want folks from other churches. I'll welcome them in, but my job is not to try and rob other people from other congregations because we say it or do it differently. Our responsibility is to evangelize our world and disciple our world. And transformation through discipleship will start changing lives, and people will show up.
One of the things that, I mean, when you talk about this, I have found it difficult as a pastor who has expectations and responsibilities to the local church that I pastor. I've found it difficult to figure out ways of getting outside of that to reach people who don't know Christ. And I suppose I could just knock on all my neighbors' doors, and yet so many times that's such a that gets met with so much resistance at times these days, to just knock on someone's door. And I know we come from a couple different generations. I was considered an elder millennial. I still technically fit in there, but I look down on other millennials because I'm like, I'm not like you, like, so anyway, I'm at the leading edge of the millennials, I guess. And so, people in my age range are saying like, yeah, technically we're millennial, but don't call me that, So anyway, we don't make phone calls, unless we have to. Like, I'll text you before I call you, or if I'm coming to your house, I'll be like, hey, I'm at your house, or something like that, rather than just go up and knock on the door. And that's how we are. And it's just, I don't know why that happened or when it changed, but that's just kind of how we operate. And a friend of mine, he's a pastor here in our town at the Wesleyan Church, and he's a business partner with me. And I wanted to lead into that in a second. He'll joke with me because he's about 10 years older than me, but he kind of lives the same way as what I was just talking about. He's like, hey, sorry to do the boomer thing and call you, but without texting you first. And we just kind of laugh. And so, that's just how a lot of things work. And we just kind of naturally have rolled with that. But then it's like, okay, if I'm supposed to reach my neighbors, and yet I'm not used to knocking on doors, like cold calling people, how do we do that? And I think of the group that is like The Art of Neighboring, I think, is a book that I've got and is part of the Bless Every Home website, where you can pray for your neighbors by name. It emails a list of them to you every day, 5 neighbors to pray for by name. And they talk a lot about how you can be a good neighbor in this age. And, if your neighbor's out raking leaves, grab a leaf rake and go over and offer to help them, or something like that. There's something that we can all do, and don't be a creeper, but like pay attention to your neighbor's schedule and be like, okay, they're clearly out late every night, but, they seem to like, they exit the house at this time of the day. Maybe there's a time where I can be outside and at least start waving at them, where they start to recognize me and recognize that I recognize them, and eventually, you're walking one evening and they're home and you can just chat with them if they're out getting their mail or something, and just start with things like that, and just offer to be there for them and be part of their life when they need it. And that's something we all can do, a lot better at to open up those doors.
Yeah. One of the things that, I don't know if you've had opportunity to take the class yet, Church in Action, Community on Missions.
Mm-mm.
So it started in Germany, and it's teaching you ways to, how can you engage your community intentionally? So the concept of this is here's one of the areas, here's one of the things that we started rolling out and started talking to our congregation about is, what would it look like to do laundry love? What would it look like for us to put together rolls of quarters and go to the local laundromat where there are folks that are there washing clothes? What would it look like if we took pizzas with us? What would it look like if we took some board games with us? And we just set up and we played board games with the kids, and we took some pizza down there to feed the moms or the caregivers and whoever was there doing laundry. We fed the kids, and then we're just plugging quarters in. Then here's the really dynamic part of it. What would it look like if it was only the team going in there made up only 50% of the church? The other 50% were people from our community, where we just reached out to them and said, hey, look, we want to reach out to the marginalized in our community. Would you like to be a part of this? You don't have to be a member of our church. You never have to darken the doors. But would you like to be able to serve your fellow man? People are in that mindset to wanting to serve people and help people, but they don't necessarily want to be connected to a church. Okay,
right.
Fine. Come partner with us. Go with us. Come over and serve with us. You can help collect items and collect things and do things. Come be a part of it with us. Their membership in the church is not required. We want you to participate with us in reaching out to our community. And those churches are exploding over there in Germany. Exploding.
Wow.
They have a ministry to the red light district, to the prostitutes. where they'll
Yeah.
carry baked goods, and the husbands will escort their wives down there, and they'll take the baked goods down, and they give those baked goods to the guys that are out the doors, the bouncers who are out the doors letting them in. And the men will stand outside and pray while the wives go upstairs and begin having conversations and talking to the ladies. Man,
Yeah.
what a novel concept. They wanted to put water wells in Africa. So they walked into a pub, and they walked into one of the bars over there, and they said, hey, we've got $10, €10 that we're going to give each and every one of you. Take this money, go double it, or go do something with it. And here's our goal. It's going to cost us $1,500 to put a water well in. Can we come together and do this?
So you mean they gave him some seed money and said, go double this?
Yeah.
And come back, and we were all going to work together to dig a
And
well.
not as a church, as a community.
It reminds me of when Jesus was talking about the parable of the talents or the minas, whatever translation you're reading. He's like, here, master, your mina has earned 5 more. He's like, well done. It's, your 2 minas has earned 2 more, and then one guy buried it in the sand. He's like, nah, I'm not even going to.
Yeah, I don't want to lose anything.
Yeah. How often, boy, it was, there was something at a district assembly a few years ago. And I remember the challenge. It was something like, if you knew you would get like $1 million to pay off debt or do ministries or whatever, if you could double your church size by reaching new people, in the next, whatever it was, 5 years, what would be your plan? Like what, that there's a $1 million payout, and you're going to be able to do pretty much any ministry you can conceive of at that point. What's your obstacles of doing that? And it's an exercise, because we all know the answer is we're going to get intentional about relationships. We're going to get out there, and we're going to start living life and doing life with people, and it's going to catch on. So why don't we do that? Well, we're busy. We've got personal schedules. We've got church finances to worry about, because we've got a mortgage, and we've got insurance, and we've got light bills and all this stuff. Got to cut the grass and, replace a roof or an air conditioner. There's always something. And we get so bogged down in that. And we forget that Jesus told us, go make disciples, go to the laundromats, go to the red light district, go to wherever it is. One of the things that, and I was starting to talk about my business, and for those who might not know, you do a lot of concrete work. You've been in that business for years and years and years. I can't seem to get away from doing lawns and landscaping. And so we started this business about 4.5 years ago because we knew somebody that needed some help. And he had a background, and kind of like giving somebody $10 to go double it and build a well. We just said, hey, we'll give you a hand up, man. Like I know he was a guy that was in recovery. He'd been in a ministry for 3 years and was doing great, but he was ready to transition out of there. And he was afraid that if he went back south, that he would hang out with all of his old buddies that he did drugs with and did all this other stuff with, and that he would fail, And so he wanted to stay on the straight and narrow. So I had some lawn equipment still, and I said, well, let's go build a business up. And so we started this business really with the intention of this one guy having a system around him. And it was a way to, kind of help be those guardrails for him and help to disciple him or continue discipling him. And then it started growing from there, and it grew bigger than I ever planned on it getting. And then recently shrank again, which I'm actually good with because it's freed up some of my time. But what it's done in the process is it's given me the opportunity to pour into a few employees' lives and have an impact and a difference on some of them. And also, I've gotten to meet and talk with so many people. And around my church, I don't say too much about my business because I'm not trying to market to them. Like, I don't want it to be something where I'm leveraging my role as pastor to get lawn work out of them. I've done very little, in fact, for anyone in my church, a few things here and there. But what I've been able to do is get around a lot of folks, and I'll tell them, like, well, I'm a pastor too, so I do this and I do this and blah, blah, blah. And they say, oh, where are you a pastor? And I tell them, and, hopefully that opens some doors up for some of those, entrance conversations to talk about things of Christ. And also I joined a business network with our company that and in fact, later today, I'll be there. And so we get, I get this weekly appointment, and some of the folks are already Christians and believers and serve in local churches, and some aren't. And so it's given me extra outlets between that and going to things with our local Chamber of Commerce and some other events like that around town. It gives me that opportunity to meet with people and to brush shoulders with them, and people that I might not have that opportunity to otherwise.
Right.
That aren't.
Yeah, you're outside the building, and that's what we're supposed to do. So I love to refer to it. The guys that I've had working with me for the last several years, 10, almost 15 years now, riding the motorcycle clubs. So hey, come to the house. We're going to work this morning. Leave your truck here. That way you're not burning your gas. And I get what I love to refer to as windshield time. You're on my clock.
Yeah.
You're in my truck. I can talk to you about anything I want to. And the conversations just get incredible. So we can pour ourselves into that. And that's a great way to be able to do it. The other side of it is one of the other ministries that our folks started here at the church. I just presented the ideas about being a church in action and reaching out beyond the doors. So one of our folks came up and said, hey, Pastor, I'd kind of like to start putting some baskets together and take them to shut-ins. I'd like to put some baskets together and take them down to the hospital, into the waiting rooms. And so they created what we now refer to as the Bob Ministry, Bethel Outreach Baskets. So
all right.
Everybody pulls stuff together. We allow the community to pull together, and our community has the list and go buy these items. We'll put these baskets together. We'll take time, put the baskets together, and then we'll go deliver them. They took them to our local hospitals, and those baskets went to the nurses' stations. Man, our nurses and physicians are worn out. So they delivered baskets to all the floors for all the nurses' stations in this entire hospital, Skyline Medical Center. Then they also made up bags for Skyline Madison campus, which deals with folks that don't have insurance and those that are struggling to pay their bills. It also has a lot of recovery in there and IOP, intensive outpatient programs. So they made sacks up that you could hand out, that they could hand out to folks as they came in for treatment. We've put the word out to our homeowners association. Hey, if you know of anybody in the neighborhood who has a baby, we want to take a basket to them. If you know of anybody in the neighborhood who loses a loved one, we can take a basket to them. And now our neighbors are saying, hey, we know about this going on. Could we get a basket to them? They're making up baskets and just taking them out now. We got ladies that got together this last week and made up baskets to go to a women's recovery house and just took the baskets over there. Pastor, we don't want to advertise this. I just wanted to let you know what was going on. Here's what we did. We made baskets up with little journals in them and little mementos to take to these women who are in the recovery houses. We just wanted to love on them a little bit. We don't want to advertise it. We don't want to put any pictures up about it. We just wanted you to know what was going on. That's the body of Christ.
Yeah. Well, and like you said, you kind of put an idea out there, talking about just getting outside the walls and serving others. And people started saying, well, what is it that I can do? And there might be some folks that maybe they can't get out and about as much. Maybe they're physically aging. We deal with a lot of that here where it's like, okay, Pastor, I used to do this, this, and this, but I can't do that physically anymore. I remember one particular day when one of our guys that he was always a greeter at the door for several years and just loved being greeted by this guy. He's just fantastic at it. And inappropriate at times too. Just some of the stuff he would say, the jokes he would make, you're like, come on, man, you can't say that, And so it's like, save those jokes for me later. I want to hear them then, but like greeting somebody at the door, Anyway, so it was just kind of funny, and it's like, all right. And one day his hips were bothering him. He was walking with a cane. You could tell things were progressing a little with that, and just the sad look in his eyes when he told me that he had to resign his post there at the door. And I know at that time he's kind of dealing with this was the last thing that I was still able to do, and now I can't do that in the church. And it's like, okay, I want to be able to say, but you still have a place in the body of Christ to fulfill what Christ has given us to do. Now there's going to be some folks, I mean, people in memory care units, I've got to go minister to a family later whose mom and grandma is, maybe in her last hours or days, the memory care pavilion. And she hasn't been able to do much for Christ in a while. And yet her testimony, still lived on, especially when her children were there and could talk about what mom's life has been and share that testimony. So even though she might not be able to do some of those things, she still is a living, walking testimony of the grace of God in her life. And so don't ever think that your time in participating in making disciples is over just because physically things have changed. But, making baskets, you might just be able to sit at home and put them together and somebody else come pick them up and distribute them. You have a part in that, Don't ever say I'm done.
I've got a lady in my church that struggles to walk. She's her family and her daughter and them bring her to church, but every single month she does every birthday and anniversary card for the members and everybody in this church. I hate doing cards. If it were left up to me,
I'm with you.
No one in this church would ever get a card from me. Literally. And up in the top corner, she even puts the date on when it needs to be mailed, where the stamp would go. It needs to go out by this date, Pastor. So, I mean, she literally does every bit of that. All I got to do is sit down here at my desk and write notes in all of them and just write them in. Then I hand them to the administrative pastor. He throws the stamps on them and gets them in the mail.
There you go. See, I could do that if somebody would set me up like that. I could handle it.
So you go.
I could get cards
talk to
out.
one of your folks in the church. Do exactly what I did.
Yeah.
Talk to one of your folks in the church and say, "Hey, look, would you be able to do this?"
I have someone that does it. She just does the whole thing, though. She does all of it, and I'll get people that say, "Pastor, thanks for the card," because she signs it from the church. And she's like, "Pastor, thanks for that card." I said, "I'll be honest. This is like when my wife gives somebody a present and it's got both our names on it. I'm like, what'd you get? Like, I don't know. But you're welcome. And you have to thank Debbie for that, because she's the one that rocks,
Yeah, Miss Darlene, that's what she does. Miss Darlene.
Yeah.
In fact, she's going to be out of town. She's got some traveling and stuff she's doing during May. So Sunday, she brings them literally in a Ziploc bag. And Pastor, I'm not going to be there for a lot of May, but I wanted to make sure you had all the cards and stuff. So I literally have it's all here, and she just makes sure that I get it.
Nice.
And absolutely incredible. But that is a way that she is serving this church and serving this community. She may not be able to go door to door. She may not be able to do all those other things, but she is pouring into the life of this church in that little simple way, and that's incredible.
And don't ever sell yourself short thinking, oh man, I've got to have this many people. Listen, with that example, if you have one person that you're working on and leading closer and closer to Christ, I don't care if that takes a year or 5 years before you feel like it's time to move on to the next person. You get that person where they are living Christ-like and ready to go out and lead other people down that path. You have done your job. You really have. And to be honest, better than many of us, better than at times I feel like I'm doing. I'm thinking, who is it that there's people that I've kind of tried this and then it kind of falls off over time. Or one guy I would meet with every week, and it seemed like all he ever wanted to do was talk about stuff. And I had to be okay with that, because I know that's part of it, and you talked about listening. I did a lot of listening with him. I talk professionally, right? Like, I talk for a living is what I say. And I couldn't get a word in edgewise with this guy. And so I would struggle to get about 5 minutes maybe of scripture study with him, because that's what I was allegedly going there for, and then I realized after a while, I said, this isn't Bible study time. This is the time that he gets with a pastor to just, listen to him and spend that time with him and show him that somebody does care. Because I don't want to get into his life, but I'm telling you, he's done some stuff that makes him hated by just about everyone. And it's just, there's no one, there's hardly any churches that wanted to let him in anywhere, and yet here I was saying, you're worth my time. I'll sit down and spend that time with you. I'll come to your house and I'll sit with you. And so, that makes a difference. Whether it feels like you're gaining much ground or not, it makes a difference. And so we've got to be willing to say, hey, you know what? It might not feel like I've got any traction under my wheels, but we're moving forward, and you're doing something.
We just got opportunity, Nick, 2 years ago, whenever COVID started, it shut everything down. Well, we've been doing the Nashville Rescue Mission, our homeless shelter here in Nashville, for 8 years. And it's been shut down for the last 2. Our biker community and the ministries have been saying, when do we get in? We're ready to go. We'll put a mask on, whatever, let's go. This past Sunday night, Easter Sunday evening, we were the first group that's come in. We brought our band in. We brought several of us in. The mission has changed the way they did things. Before, it was mandatory that every guest had to go to chapel service. So we would have anywhere from 350 to 550 men in this sanctuary. Now they have it switched over. We walked in there the other night, and there were literally only about 60 chairs out. And there were stacks of chairs. And so I just asked the chaplain there, I said, so you guys don't have chairs out for everybody? And he said, no, it's not mandatory anymore. Chapel service is voluntary. And I said, okay, you used to have the doors closed going down to the hallways and into the day rooms and back to the cafeteria, and those are open now. And I said, can we send some of our guys down through there just to go talk to some of the residents and some of the guests tonight? Oh, yeah, get as creative as you want to. I told one of our guys, and 5 of them took off. We'll be back whenever. We're going down the hallway. They came back in. Man, I had opportunity to pray with 6 guys. I had opportunities to talk to them. And I started seeing this steady stream of men start walking in and grabbing chairs off and sitting down and engaging in the service. So it started with about 50 maybe in there in the chapel area. And we ended with probably 70, just because those guys got intentional and said, let's go be the salt and let's go be the light of Jesus and let's go hang out in the hallways. So now we're thinking through this concept of every time we come down, we're going to come down at least an hour early, and we're just going to start walking the hallways.
Just start talking to folks.
We're going to be doing service down here in a little bit. Come down if you'd like to.
Yeah.
Then the most important aspect of it, when we began doing this ministry, I remember riding home one night on my motorcycle, and I broke into tears because God said to me, Joe, anytime you come down and minister to my people, I expect you to do it with excellence, not off the cuff. And I began crying because I hadn't spent a lot of intentional time. Like if I were standing up in front of the church service here, we spend that time in study and knowing what we're doing, right?
Yeah.
Well,
it's supposed to be 20 hours, remember?
Yeah, never 20 hours for me. But
no.
I ended up in tears that night riding home because God just simply said, these are my children, and they deserve excellence every single time. Don't ever come in here halfway. And I said, God, forgive me for walking in here haphazardly. Yeah. Forgive me for not putting the time in to take care of the least of these, for what you've called me to do. And he expects us to be prepared. Just because we're moving into a jail, just because we're going into a homeless camp, just because we're going in someplace where we may label folks as not being educated or not understanding, and we think we have to simplify it so much that we water it down. where to speak excellence. And then that night, riding on my motorcycle, he said, Joe, here's the message for my children. You matter.
Wow.
And you have value and you have worth. And every time you're here, reassure my children that they matter. Reassure my children that they have value, and reassure my children that they have worth. And we make it a point every single time we're there to make sure that those men know that. It doesn't matter where
you matter, you have value, and you have worth. You matter, you have value, and you have worth.
Isn't that the message that our people need to hear today?
Well, and especially what you're talking about, that's the context of where they live, because everywhere they go, you're like, oh, you're homeless, you don't matter, you're not bringing any value to the world. There's what are you adding? You don't have any worth. They're being told the opposite of that every day by everybody that averts their gaze or won't make eye contact with them at a traffic light or whatever, that won't lend a helping hand. This morning I had somebody that called me and he just needed gas money because he's living in his van with his dog. And I don't know if you guys have seen a rise in that. We've seen such a rise in that around here over the last several months to a year, because a lot of with the raising property values, people are wanting to sell their homes and cash in that have been rental homes for years. And so they kick out the tenants, sell the house, make their money. And I don't fault them for it. I'm just saying that's what's gotten to this point now where people that were living on the edge and just barely could afford their place, now they don't have a house anymore and they can't afford the next one. They don't have any money saved up for a down payment. They're honestly living on food stamps and $800 a month disability payment. And they're lucky if they have a vehicle that probably has subpar insurance and needs a ton of maintenance. And now gas prices hit $4 a gallon or whatever. And so they can't even, and so they have to move into their car. But where do they park? Where do they not get run out? They run them out from the city-owned parks. They'll run them out from, some vacant lot somewhere where they're trespassing. They try to park at Walmart, but Walmart's not open 24 hours anymore. So eventually they start running people out of the lot there, unless you're in a truck or an RV or something. And so it's just, every place they go, they're being told, we don't want you here. And what did they do? They were living in their house, and now here they are basically homeless. They didn't do anything for that, and yet everybody's saying you're not worth anything. And God told you, tell these people they're worth it.
And, I've asked the question in these services, how many of you feel invisible? And how many of you in the service feel invisible?
Oh, invisible,
to our homeless community. And I mean, Nick, hands go up all across the sanctuary. And it's man, how many times have we pulled up at the traffic light and we've seen somebody there holding a sign on the side of the road, and we've started jiggling with our phone. We've started playing with something over in the
we
scene.
do this. We do this real quick right here.
Yeah. Let me pick that up and just totally ignore them. And so I think our society needs to hear. I think our world needs to hear you matter. And you have value and you have worth. And I know things are rough on you right now, and I know things are stacked up against you. But if you don't hear anything else tonight, hear the fact that you matter and that you have value and you have worth.
Yeah.
So, man, this has been a fun conversation today. This is something that we could just keep going and going and going and going on, right?
Yeah, man, there's one more thing that I just been rattling around in my head, and it's something that I heard. I talked about going to an exponential conference a while back, and there's just one more, something that I heard there that I think is really important to this conversation. Are you familiar with Larry Osborne? He's a pastor, speaker, author. He wrote the book Sticky Church and Sticky Teams is one of his kind of well-known books. And he's got a bunch of others.
I haven't. No.
He's out on the West Coast.
I'll have to look that one up on Audible. You got me on Audibles now, so I have to look that one up.
He's great, and I've heard him a couple of times at conferences and things, especially at Exponential, and he's fantastic. So he talked about specifically about discipleship, and one of the things that he was talking about was he said the watering schedule. He says don't force people to repeat your watering schedule. And I was like, what's he talking about? And so it's like, okay, well, I get up every morning and I read the scripture, and then I have this time of prayer, and I do this and I do that. And we approach discipleship as if we just do that, make them do the same things we do, then we've made a disciple. We basically carbon copied ourselves. For those of you who are like Gen Zers, carbon copies were a sheet of paper or a sheet of carbon that would be in between two sheets of paper. And when you would write on one, it would write to the other. Anyway, we make these carbon copies of ourselves, and we think, oh, we did it. But, he talked about his wife. He said I forget what business she's in, but she has to read like publications. She has to read things for her job, and she reads a lot and she studies a lot for her profession. He says, but she doesn't actually read the scripture very much. And he's like a pastor, and he's like, you got to read the Bible, right? Like, I read the Bible, you should read the Bible. And yet, he said she is more of an example of what a Christ-like person is in the way that she lives, both when people see her and when they don't see her. She is more Christ-like than almost anyone he knows, including himself. And he said, it's not that she's ignorant of the Bible, but he said, really until a few hundred years ago, nobody had their personal or their family Bible. You couldn't even read the thing, up until Martin Luther started being like, hey guys, this should be in our language too. And so, you don't have to be a clergy to read this thing. And so he says, we can't just say, well, and I think biblical literacy, I think we need to have people that are more biblically literate. But nonetheless, don't just say, well, this is what worked for me. I remember so many people that have tried to tell me that I had to keep a spiritual journal.
Yeah.
No, I'm not doing it. I just won't. Like, I just, if I have to sit down and start writing my thoughts for the day or what God said to me today or whatever, it just won't happen. And I've tried when I was forced to, for classes and ministry education and all that. And I never did it beyond that time period where I was forced to do it, to turn it into class. But how can we do things that don't just mimic our watering schedule or the methods that we have, but how can we still make disciples on their terms? Like, what's going to work for the person we're discipling? What's going to work for them to make them a Christ-like follower?
That's good. That ought to be the topic of our next podcast together. Is what are some tools that you and I use as pastors, that you and I use in our own lives? What are some tools, and how are some ways that we study Scripture and we prepare ourselves? But not only that, what are the things that we do for our own spiritual growth and our own Sabbath and our sabbaticals, and being able to take that time to get quiet? Man, how much time do we spend in quiet and really getting good quiet time? I have to shut my phone off. I have to shut everything down. I have to just kind of disappear. I can get on my motorcycle and then no one can bother me because I can't hear the phone ring on my motorcycle. So those are great times to do that. But
I just jotted it down. It's officially our next topic. So folks, look forward to that. That's what we'll talk about next time.
I tell you, it's there may be some folks that'll tune in and say, man, these guys just talk a whole lot about all kinds of different stuff. Yeah, we do. We want this to be Let's Talk, and we want this to be an opportunity not only for you and I to be able to engage, but for others to be able to engage us. So hope folks will have questions, and it'd be nice if we can get this set up to a point where we can even start taking some chat questions and stuff as we're doing things.
Yeah, we actually have that ability. And one of the things I plan on doing is, of course, getting a bunch of you to maybe share this with your friends, whatever podcast platform you're using, whether it's, iTunes or Amazon Music or Google Podcasts. It's on Facebook as a podcast. It's on YouTube as a video podcast. Every one of those has a share button. We would love it if you would share this with someone else. If you found it the least bit enjoyable, share it with some friends, share it with somebody that you know. And especially if it's on Facebook, that's so easy to just hit that share button and share it to your page and get it out there, and maybe say a little bit about what you enjoyed from it. And we'd really appreciate that. Always feel free to leave a comment on those platforms. or if you want to engage with us directly, or if you've got questions or want to hear a little bit more, or something that you'd like us to talk about in the future, you can email us. It's connect.letstalkpodcast@gmail.com. connect.letstalkpodcast@gmail.com. So love to have you reach out to us there, and any questions or comments or anything like that, we'd be happy to hear it.
I think
Joe, anything you want plugged?
What's that?
Anything you want plugged that we can put, or any links you want thrown up here in the descriptions on the podcast?
Wouldn't have a clue how to do it. I'll leave all that to you, buddy. But one of the things I want folks who are tuning in to understand is that we are two men who have been called by God. We're walking into something that was at one point far out of our spectrum and even our thinking and even our grasp of God will never use me in this way. So we're still trying to figure out answers, aren't we, Nick? We're still trying to figure out the way. We're still trying to understand things. So realize that we're all on this journey together. And there isn't a hierarchy thing that goes on here. We're hand in hand walking this journey together. That's what it's all about. And that's discipleship.
Yeah.
My Amy, who does our media stuff, wrote a poem. She's an incredible writer. But we shared it on Monday, Thursday, and it's called Dust of the Rabbi. And the questions that she asked in this is, are we walking so closely with Jesus that we have the dust off of his feet in our eyes, in our nose, in our mouth, in our ears? Are we walking so closely with him that the dust he is kicking up off the road is permeating and just getting into every part of our bodies? Man, that's where I want to live my life at. I want to walk around just being dirty every day with the dust of the rabbi, with the dust of Jesus all over me. That's all I got, buddy.
Yeah, I love it. Me too. I'm good. Let's call it a wrap on that. And, stay tuned for further episodes. We do this a couple times a month, so we'll be back before you know it. Shameless plug. I'm starting another podcast too. I can't get enough of this. It's called Nick Will Talk About Anything. So I've got a bunch of different guests that I'm trying to line up and just talk with people from all kinds of stuff. I mean, there'll be a couple pastors in there here and there, but really it's a lot more than that. And my goal with it really is I'm interested in what their lives are, what they're doing, where they've come from, where they're headed. And I've actually got two coming up within the next few days that I'm going to be recording for that one. Like, one is our local chief of police, who's actually, when you hear around the country, all these police officers that, maybe are involved in a shooting, and we're questioning whether it was, something that absolutely needed to happen or not, or whether it's, racial things that are going on within police enforcement, and whatever it all is, you hear about that and we start saying, man, I think we could do better. I'm telling you what, our police force here in Zephyr Hills is fantastic. Our police chief is, he was doing this stuff the right way before it was popular. You know what I mean? He's looking for ways to say, you know what, there's some things that I can't arrest our way out of this problem. There's going to take some solutions that aren't just arresting people, but actually meeting them where they're at. I think in a lot of ways what he's doing is kind of something that the church needs to learn from and say, if people aren't just getting better, how are we going to get out there and reach them for Christ? So he's one of them. I've got another one that's she's coming in. She's going to be talking about her life. She immigrated from South America, and she's up here in business. She wrote a book. She's a Latino Republican, which is not the most common thing, and so she's got her own takes on that. So while we're not going to jump into politics here, it looks like I'm jumping in on that other one just a little bit if that's where the guest leads, because as I said, I'll talk about anything. So I love it if you guys check that podcast out as well. And if you got any guests that you think would be good on that, I'd love to talk with them, because I will talk about anything. Joe, thanks for being here. Thanks for listening to my shameless plug, and blessings on you and your ministry.
Bless you guys. Have a great day. See you, brother.
Right on.